Story 1. The Jonestown final recording captures people panicking and passing away while Frank Sinatra sings at half speed in the background. It is very unsettling. Story 2. Not necessarily spooky but a little unsettling, the declassified recordings of radio traffic between the White House, Air Force One, and another government jet with cabinet members aboard on the day John F. Kennedy was assassinated. Chaotic not only due to the circumstances but also due to technological limitations at the time. Story 3. You can receive radio signals from Jupiter on the shortwave spectrum. You can find the recording on the internet. Sounds eerie. Story 4. One of the craziest stories, for sure, is the woman who posted on Reddit a long time ago that her sleep tracker application recorded a mysterious voice speaking to her in the middle of the night. After much investigation, it was concluded that it was a home intruder. Story 5. The relief captain, Yaroslav Kadrinsky, brought his children, a 15-year-old son and a 13-year-old daughter, on the flight for their first international trip. They were brought into the cockpit, and against regulations, he allowed them to sit at the controls. He had the autopilot engaged and thought it would be safe. The son applied enough pressure to the controls for 30 seconds, partially disengaging the autopilot and taking control of the ailerons for roll. He eventually noticed the plane was banking to the right because of his actions, but by then the plane had banked too sharply and began losing altitude. The autopilot tried to pitch the nose up, but the plane stalled, fully disengaging the autopilot. An automatic system then caused the plane to nosedive to counter the stall, allowing the two pilots to return to their seats and struggle to regain control. They managed to level the wings but had lost altitude too quickly to recover. The plane crashed on its belly at roughly 160 miles per hour, 16 minutes after the children were at the controls, and 2.5 minutes after the son noticed the plane banking right. Both children and all 73 other occupants died on impact. Story 6. Frederick Valentik, who went missing over Bass Strait between Victoria and Tasmania, Australia. He claimed he was being followed by a plane 1,000 feet above him, and just before the audio cuts out, he says, "It is not an aircraft." The control tower in Melbourne asked him if he could identify the aircraft. Story 7. Off the top of my head, Operation Wandering Soul, a nightmarish audio track used as psychological warfare by the United States against the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese Army in the Vietnam War, was played on loudspeakers at night. It was intended to demoralize enemy fighters and make them desert their posts, leading to fewer combatants for the United States to fight. The Vietnamese believed heavily in the afterlife, and that if someone did not receive a proper burial, their soul would wander the earth as a ghost instead, urging them to return home to their families to avoid becoming like them. The United States had an entire team create the tapes, even using South Vietnamese troops' voices to make it believable to the enemy. The altered, ghostly voices along with the freakish and genuinely horrifying sounds on the tape give me chills. Just imagine being in the dense jungle in the middle of a dark night, hiding out in makeshift ambush positions with your comrades, and that god-awful eerie recording is just audible enough in the distance to make out what it is. Yet you do not know where it is coming from, as it could be coming from a patrol boat far away cruising down the river. Absolute nightmare fuel. Story 8. I heard this a few years ago. There is a recording of an office worker with a 911 operator during the September 11th attacks asking when the firefighters were coming. The operator was responding they were nearly there. He became angry and yelled at her. Suddenly, his demeanor changed. He panicked and the line went dead. The tower collapsed. Story 9. Former paramedic here. Those packs that firefighters wear on their backs, self-contained breathing apparatus, have something called a personal alert safety system. These alarms activate whenever a firefighter remains motionless for too long. Sometimes, you will see a firefighter do a little dance called the personal alert safety system shimmy. The idea is that if you go down in a low visibility environment, the alarm alerts other rescuers and helps them find you. It is 95 decibels, so it is very loud. They were audible for days under the rubble at the World Trade Center. They kept beeping until their batteries finally ran out. 343 personal alert safety system alarms. Many years ago, I was listening to a podcast that played an audio clip of the aftermath, and I ripped the earbuds out of my ears without even fully comprehending what I was doing. Story 10. Well, reading the comments, I am not clicking on any of these links. Mine is much more simple. It is a reconstruction of what scientists think dinosaurs would sound like, and it made me feel like I was the prey of something absolutely unavoidable, and it shook me. This is what scientists believe a Tyrannosaurus rex sounded like. Story 11. Some strange contact radio recording from the 1940s, I believe, of a girl listing random numbers. There is a lot of static, and her voice is faint, giving a ghostly effect. 7:25:11. Story 12. Me. Number stations. Everyone else. Horrific stories of people dying. Really, I should have known better than to click. Story 13. I think I have a different definition of what is considered spooky than most people here so far. Spooky to me is more supernatural uneasiness, not a traumatizing recording of someone horrifically dying. Story 14. I heard a 911 recording a few years ago of a woman who was kidnapped, held captive, and sexually assaulted. She called 911 while her abductor was sleeping, so she was whispering the whole time, but the fear in her voice was very clear. Felt eerie and sad at the same time. It haunted me for several days. Story 15. The Russian number stations are shortwave radio broadcasts featuring cold, monotone voices reading numbers or code phrases, often set against bursts of static. No one fully knows their purpose, and the mechanical repetition can be unsettling. Story 16. Probably the video taken by a girl who zipped her partner up in a suitcase, and you can hear him saying it is hard to breathe and telling her to let him out. Knowing that he died in there gives me chills. I do not remember much more about it except that both people were described as somewhat unkind to each other. It is not a clear-cut situation, but still creepy. Story 17. Not ever, but I caught the audio recording of the firefighters in Idaho who were getting sniped at about a month ago, and that rattled me pretty badly. The terror and desperation in their voices were intense. I am paraphrasing, but it was something like, Battalion Chief 1 is down, Battalion Chief 2 is down. Shots fired at us from multiple directions. You have to stop anyone else from coming up here. Story 18. Threnody for the Victims of Hiroshima. A piece of experimental classical music that uses sound to portray the horrors of the nuclear bombing of Hiroshima. Absolutely eerie and haunting. Story 19. A few that have really disturbed me have already been mentioned here. One that personally spooks me is the presumed real sounds that a Tyrannosaurus rex would make, especially the laughing-like vocalization. That one really gives me chills. Story 20. The child called the police for help because he had trapped himself in his parents' minivan in a position that was slowly choking him. At first, they thought he was joking, but then they sent someone to find him. The police officer nearly found him but did not, and he died. It is sad to listen to. Story 21. Okay, so everyone here seems to be sharing not safe for life clips. I am taking a different approach. I love spooky campfire stories. I love Bigfoot. But the idea of a giant, possibly malevolent ape monster running around the woods kind of terrified me as a kid. There is a 911 call from a man in Washington who claims to see Bigfoot in his yard. You can hear the panic in his voice when he spots it and when he describes it. It sounds like he knows the dispatcher will not believe him if he just says there is a Bigfoot in his yard. But at the same time, he does not have another way to say it. The video is of poor quality, but honestly the audio is all that matters. Story 22. Anybody got time for a little water sound and whatever else is in the ocean? Story 23. I actually listened live to a small plane crash in the late 1980s in San Antonio. I was flying with a friend straight over San Antonio Airport heading north to Austin one night when we heard a pilot tell the control tower he was in trouble and needed directions to the runway. We switched to the guard channel as his conversation continued. He finally spotted the runway but said he was not going to make it that far and would attempt to land in a field. Roger, the field, the tower replied. I'm not going to make it, were his last words. Then the tower dispatched crash trucks. We flew on in silence. 2 people survived. Story 24. The recordings Jim Jones made when he forced his followers to drink the flavored drink at Jonestown will stay with you forever. 0 out of 10 do not recommend listening to them. Story 25. Japan Airlines Flight 123 cockpit voice recorder plane crash. The pilots were trying to control an out-of-control plane that was doomed when its rear tail section blew off. Pretty harrowing. Story 26. The emergency call recording of the woman in floodwaters. The operator showed no empathy and even mocked her. The woman ultimately passed away in the floodwaters. It is incredibly heartbreaking. Story 27. Audio from inside one of the rooms at the Parkland school shooting showcases the raw terror. Story 28. I'm leaving this here. I'm not listening to any of the links you all are posting because reading it is more than enough. You all are crazy. Story 29. It is technically a video clip but does not show anything gory. It is a dashboard camera video of a family driving behind a large truck. A brick or something large and heavy falls off the truck, goes through the windshield, and instantly kills the wife and mother in the passenger seat. The audio of the husband and children reacting to their wife and mother being instantly killed is haunting and stays with you long after you have seen it. Story 30. The police interviews of John Venables and Robert Thompson, two 10-year-old boys who murdered a 2-year-old in England. Story 31. The Sierra Sounds are audio recordings of Sasquatch chatter from the Sierra Nevada mountains in the 1970s. Story 32. To this day, even knowing the probable source and that it was not really that mysterious, the old tape, also known as the WKCR hijacking, shakes me to my core. That initial jarring screech is pure nightmare fuel. Story 33. Adolf Hitler speaking in a calm and normal voice. I find it unsettling how charming and friendly this sounds. Story 34. A recording of an emergency alert response/operations notification system phone call where he is whispering, "Going to kill you." My skin crawled listening to it. Story 35. An audio recording of an elderly woman's emergency call to 911. She said there was a man stalking her. After the responder asks some questions, you hear her scream, a thud, and the line disconnecting. Story 36. The Challenger accident affected many people deeply. Some tried to stop it while others prayed. It has stayed with many for years, and just thinking about it makes me try not to cry. Since then, I have tried to avoid any audio clips of major accidents like plane or car crashes. Story 37. During the Queen's live televised funeral coverage, the audio of a woman saying, "The death is irreversible, and the fact that she is trapped," is heard clearly. I believe it is the independent television coverage. The broadcaster abruptly says, "As you can see," pauses, then repeats and finishes the sentence in a calmer, normal voice. Story 38. Number stations, Swedish Rhapsody, and UVB 76. That eerie childlike voice and the endless buzzing still give me chills. Story 39. It turned out to be a hoax, but it still gives me chills. The Yorkshire Ripper tapes. They are available online in their entirety. During a series of horrific murders of women in Yorkshire, a man with a Geordie accent sent cassette tapes and letters to the police, taunting them for not catching him, threatening to kill more women, calling them sluts and saying, "I bet you warned them, but they never listen," about the sex workers in the area the Ripper was targeting. The spooky part is that the real Yorkshire Ripper benefited from the fake tapes. Police attention was focused on identifying the man based on his handwriting, a blood group they were able to get from the letter envelope, and the man's thick accent, which the actual Ripper did not share. He also followed what the hoaxer threatened to do in order to keep police attention on the tapes. At one point, the hoaxer said he might kill an older woman in Manchester. So that is what the real Ripper, Peter Sutcliffe, did. It is thought that if the hoax tapes were never made, or the police had recognized them as fake, the Ripper could have been caught sooner, saving lives. Story 40. The 1915 recording of Rudyard Kipling's poem Boots, performed by Taylor Holmes, is used in torture resistance training sessions in the United States military. It is chilling, to say the least. Story 41. I'm not sure that 99% of the submissions here are spooky, to be honest. Spooky is not just disturbing and unsettling. Story 42. Man, I came here hoping for spooky ghost noises and the like, but it is all just emergency calls and recordings of people dying in heart-wrenching and soul-crushing ways. That is not spooky. That is just sad. Now I am sad. Story 43. I'm very glad there isn't a recording of the worst thing I've ever heard someone discuss. I am a maritime archaeologist, and there are far fewer of us than one might think, even those whose area of interest is something as enormous as the Titanic. I heard a recording of an interview with Eva Hart near the end of her life. She was 7 when the ship sank, and she said, "The screaming was terrible, but the silence was worse." Regarding the actual sinking, Story 44. The number station broadcast Swedish Rhapsody. Not too terrifying, but definitely uncomfortable. Story 45. Those strange trumpet sounds reportedly heard around the world several years ago were eerie. Story 46. The Sierra Sounds recording captures a few hunters who recorded frightening loud sounds and speech while inside their makeshift cabin deep in the woods. The tapes have been authenticated and considered real by multiple sources, but the source of the sounds is unknown. Many believe it is proof of Bigfoot or something similar, but that is speculation. The recording starts about 45 seconds in. Story 47. The man waited in his home for the 2 burglars who repeatedly broke into his house. He shot them both dead. He audio recorded the incident. When I was a child, I was fascinated with Bigfoot. A television documentary played an audio clip of a Bigfoot yelling and howling. The sound started low, then rose higher and higher, lasting a long time. It frightened me greatly as a child. Story 48. Not the spookiest, but recordings of elk bugles are very creepy. If you were out in the woods by yourself and heard one close by, no. Story 49. The YouTube channel Dark 5 has many unsettling videos about mysteries and sounds, especially the early videos before the voiceovers. Story 50. The strange recordings made in the 1960s of what people thought may have been lost cosmonauts are very eerie. Story 51. I once listened to a recording that was supposed to simulate what auditory hallucinations are like for a person with schizophrenia. Terrified me, and I could only manage a few seconds. Story 52. Kevin Cosgrove's emergency call from one of the towers during the September 11th attacks includes a moment where he begins screaming, "Oh God, oh," as the floors above him start collapsing and the call ends. Story 53. Not that I disagree with all of the death and murder audio clips people are posting. I will take a different route and say one of the spookiest audio clips, in terms of being actually spooky to me and not heart-wrenching or disturbing, is the National Aeronautics and Space Administration audio of a black hole. Story 54. I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. You can hear in Oppenheimer's voice that he realized they made a grave mistake. Story 55. 4-dimensional binaural audio of what was supposed to be a haunted, abandoned insane asylum. You were supposed to watch it, close your eyes, and just hear ramblings, screaming, and loud bumps all around you. Scared me a lot. Story 56. For some ear bleach, here is a beluga whale mimicking human speech. It is actually a bit eerie, but it is also very funny. Story 57. There is a recording of 2 people in Iowa or the Dakotas. He is talking to 911 as hypothermia sets in. You can hear his reasoning slip away. He describes all the people seeing him, all the eyes. He was in a cow field. It is just creepy. Story 58. I wish I could find the one I am thinking of, but it was people getting yelled at by mountain people or something like that. People camping in the woods with what sounds like wild people yelling at them. Creeped me out when I first heard it. Story 59. There is a very specific soundbite in a horror podcast called The White Vault that has people chanting through a radio recording, and that genuinely keeps me up at night. Story 60. The phone call from the caseworker who was supposed to be supervising a visit for Josh Powell and his children. He grabbed the children, took them into the house, tried to kill them unsuccessfully, and blew the house up, which killed him and the children. The caseworker was distraught because he had locked the door, and she could not get in. The dispatcher was unhelpful. Also, many of the September 11th phone calls are difficult to listen to. Story 61. The last emergency call from Shannon Gilbert before she went missing is a chilling recording. The thought of running through a marsh in the middle of winter at 3 a.m. while being followed by someone who wanted to hurt you left a strong impact on me. All of the Gilgo Beach murders fascinate me because of the number of victims and the long time span of the crimes. It was not just one person. There were definitely multiple people involved. Story 62. The toy box killer recording. I got through 20 seconds until I couldn't anymore. Just imagine waking up somewhere after being kidnapped and that recording starts playing. Absolutely not. Story 63. Amber Takaro was an Alberta woman who accepted a ride from a stranger who ended up taking her life. Amber was intelligent and had a bad feeling about the man, so she called her brother, who was incarcerated at the time, resulting in a recorded call. In the conversation, Amber expresses suspicion of the man and realizes he is not taking her to Edmonton as agreed. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police released a brief audio clip of this conversation in hopes of identifying the suspect, who is likely a serial killer. I recommend the podcast in her defense, 50th Street, if you are interested in learning about the case. Story 64. Jonestown has already been mentioned, so I will add The Exorcism of Annalise Michel. Both of these kept me up at night after listening. Story 65. The 911 call for Michael Brewer. He was 15 and set on fire by 4 other kids. A neighbor called 911. You can hear the terror and pain he is in throughout the whole call. And oddly, the Ruby Franck 911 call stuck with me too. It is not as horrific as the other call. It is just hearing that older man cry for a child he does not even know that always makes me so sad. Story 66. When they put the audio recorder into the deepest hole anyone had ever made, it sounded like the depths of hell. It completely traumatized 14-year-old me. Story 67. The murder of Kyle Dinkheller. Kyle Dinkheller was a 22-year-old deputy who pulled over Andrew Brannon for speeding in 1998. It started as a normal interaction, but Brannon became belligerent and the situation escalated to both men drawing weapons on each other. Dinkheller had been on the force for 2 years. Brannon was a former soldier who had served in the Vietnam War. Brannon outgunned Dinkheller, shooting him in the stomach and eventually in the eye, killing him. Dinkheller's dash camera was recording, capturing the entire interaction, his final moments, and his screams. Brannon suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder and mental health problems stemming from his service in Vietnam. The video is very upsetting, showing 2 lives destroyed. Brannon was caught the next day, charged with murder, and executed in 2015. The footage is used in police training, though the screams are difficult to watch. This tragic event stemmed from a simple traffic stop. Story 68. I am surprised that nobody has mentioned the Sally House recording made by the podcast Astonishing Legends. I imagine that there is probably a rational, scientific, or technological explanation for what they picked up on that recording, any number of them, but it still is quite eerie and a little shocking if you are willing to suspend your more rational judgments and give it a listen. Story 69. I know what it is, or at least what it is presumed to be. Plates of ice scraping against one another or settling, but the bloop. It is really hard for me to listen to it and not imagine some giant eyeless monstrosity in the dark communicating with whatever it thinks may listen. Story 70. Here are some places where people do not die. Okay, hear me out. I listen to classical music from a radio when I go to bed. And one night I forgot to set the sleep timer. The emergency alert system went off while I was sleeping. I immediately woke up, and it scared me a lot. 2 to 3 weeks later, I watched a video called Half as Interesting about the emergency alert system alarm and found out what that noise was. Then, a couple of days ago, it happened twice in the same night because of floods in a distant county, and both times it scared me again. I do not know if I get jump scared easily. Oh, also, how has nobody mentioned the THX sound? That is very scary. I am young and innocent, so I guess these clips probably are not that scary. Story 71. There is a New York radio broadcast on the Internet Archive from September 11, 2001. As they are talking, you can faintly hear the sound of the first jet hitting the World Trade Center tower in the background. Story 72. The toy box killers reading their introduction letter to newly kidnapped women about what awaited them. Story 73. Children crying. Having been torn from their families and imprisoned at the United States-Mexico border, being interrogated by immigration and customs enforcement agents. A child sobbing Guatemala over a cacophony of terrified sobs. America lost many of these children. Story 74. The air traffic control recordings with the crew of Alaska Airlines Flight 261. From the moment they first report their flight control malfunction to when there is finally no more contact with them. The tape also includes eyewitness pilots of other aircraft in the area who are reporting what they are seeing until the final pilot announces, "He is down. He hit the water." Story 75. Betty Ong was a flight attendant on the first flight that crashed into the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001. You can hear silence after she says she is far away and that the plane is very low. It is chilling and sad. Story 76. Spooky? In the show Ghost Hunters, when they replay an electronic voice phenomenon and an elderly woman's voice clearly says, "I'm here, where are you?" There is also the thermal image of the workman at the hotel in Eureka Springs. Story 77. There was a YouTube channel that used to read Reddit stories aloud. The videos lasted about 7 minutes. One time, the narrator, for some unfathomable reason, included 3D audio of knocking against a wall. I was listening with headphones while leaning on my couch next to the wall. Knock, knock, knock. I was completely startled. My hair stood up, chills ran down my spine, and I got up to check everywhere, wondering what was causing the knocking. Finally, I rewound and discovered the audio was from YouTube. I unsubscribed and blocked the channel. Story 78. The Josephine County Emergency Call. A woman is in her house in a remote area. Her ex is trying to get in, and she calls emergency services. The dispatcher tells her that due to budget cuts, there is no one available to respond. They stay on the phone together while the ex is desperately trying to break in. The woman sounds increasingly defeated, and at one point, it is clear she realizes that no help is coming. Eventually, the call disconnects. When authorities are finally able to contact the woman, they discover that the ex had broken in and she had been assaulted. They could not send anyone due to budget cuts. There was literally no officer available to respond. Story 79. I think last year some recordings of what space or black holes sounded like were circulating, and those frightened me a lot. They made me feel the worst sort of dread and emptiness. Story 80. The former Area 51 employee who calls into Coast to Coast AM is a classic. Edit. Including link. Actually spooky, not just heartbreaking. Story 81. The woman heard 2 people talking on a recording one night while she slept. What are you doing? Nothing. That's them. Shudders. Story 82. Thoroughly surprised that nobody mentioned this, my first thought was the German borehole. A Dutch journalist lowered a microphone into it once temperatures became too hot to drill any further. The subsequent recording sounded like a mass of people screaming. Creepy. I am fascinated by the possibility of gateways to hell. Story 83. A police officer pulls a woman over for speeding, and her car is not registered, so he decides to impound it. She unloads a number of items from the trunk, and he notices a smell. He asks her to open some of the items and discovers a dead child. It turns out she had 2 dead children inside, her niece and nephew. The way that man screams is unforgettable. Story 84. The 2 moments that get me and feel eerie are the events of September 11th, about 5 or 6 hours later. Firefighters have a device that beeps if they do not move for 2 minutes or more. The sound of multiple devices beeping in overlap, knowing that each one likely belongs to a fallen firefighter, is heartbreaking and spooky. The second moment is similar in nature. There is a level in the game Ready or Not based on the Pulse nightclub shooting. In that level, you constantly hear cell phones ringing. During the cleanup after the Pulse incident, first responders had to wear hearing protection to block out the sound of cell phones constantly ringing. It is a spooky detail to note. Story 85. The EVP recording from the police body camera footage in the Watts family home after Chris murdered his children and wife is the most compelling ghost evidence I have ever seen or heard. There is no reason for the police to be tampering with it. Story 86. Remember when Australia had all of those wildfires? I came across a video of one of the scenes, and the audio captured animals caught in the inferno. It is heart-wrenching, and I get an upset stomach whenever I think about it. Please do not look it up. Story 87. That video where the mother jumps into the water and gets swept away under the ice is very tragic. If you think the brick video is bad, this one is much worse. Story 88. You should look up Paul Bernardo and Carla Hamalka, who committed killings in Toronto, Canada. They videotaped their assaults and murders of young girls, and one of the victims was the sister of Carla Hamalka. Carla handed her own sister over to her abusive boyfriend, who drugged, raped, and killed her. They recorded everything, and Carla used the secret location of those tapes as leverage to secure a favorable deal. Story 89. Well, I am not in a great place mentally at the moment, so I am opting out of this thread quickly. Story 90. An emergency call reported an elderly woman trapped in her burning house. You could hear the fire growing closer to her as she was burning. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.